He mended her fence every spring without being asked. She paid his doctor bill without being told. The fence ran along the north boundary of her property, where her land met his, and every spring the frost heave pushed the posts out of true, and the wire sagged, and the cattle, her cattle, 6 head that were all she had left of the herd her husband had built before the fever took him, would wander through the gaps onto his land. And the wandering was not a problem for him, because his land had grass enough for his cattle and hers. But it was a problem for her, because the wandering meant the fence was broken, and a broken fence was a visible sign of a woman who could not maintain her property. And the visibility of the sign was the thing that hurt, because the sign said what everyone in the county was already thinking: she cannot do this alone. Her name was Dory Tull. She was 34 years old, and she had been a widow for 2 years, since her husband Emmett had died of typhoid in the summer of 1885, and the 2 years since Emmett's death had been years of learning how to run a ranch alone, learning how to fix what broke, learning how to do without the things she could not fix, and the doing without had become a skill, and the skill had become an identity, and the identity was a woman who does not ask for help. His name was Sullivan Gage. He was 40 years old, and he owned the adjacent property, 120 acres of grassland in the Flint Hills of Kansas, with a house and a barn and a creek, and a disposition so quiet that people in town sometimes forgot he existed, which suited Sullivan, because existence in a small town is a social activity, and Sullivan preferred existence as a solitary one. He was not antisocial. He was simply a man who found the company of cattle more restful than the company of people, because cattle do not require conversation, and people do, and conversation was a currency Sullivan spent carefully, the way a man with limited funds spends money, only when the purchase matters. He had come to the Flint Hills from Ohio 12 years earlier, following the grass the way some men follow gold or timber or the promise of a city. The grass had been enough. The grass in the Flint Hills is not ordinary grass. It is bluestem and switchgrass, an Indian grass that grows 6 feet tall in the summer and burns in the autumn and comes back in the spring with the persistence of something that cannot be killed. And the persistence of the grass matched something in Sullivan's character, a stubbornness that expressed itself not as argument, but as continuity, the decision to keep doing a thing not because the thing is easy, but because the thing is right, and the rightness is its own reward. He had watched Dory from across the fence line for the 2 years of Emmett's illness, the slow diminishment of a man, the slow shouldering by a woman of work that had been divided between 2 people and was now being carried by one, and the watching had been the recognition of competence under pressure, and competence under pressure was the thing Sullivan respected most, because competence under pressure is rare, and rarity deserves attention, and attention was Sullivan's form of respect. The fence mending began in the first spring after Emmett died. Sullivan rode his fence line in March the way he did every March, and when he reached the north boundary he saw what the frost had done. 3 posts heaved, the wire drooping to the ground in 2 places, a gap wide enough for cattle to walk through, and he fixed it. He did not ask Dory's permission because asking would have required a conversation, and the conversation would have required Dory to acknowledge that she needed help, and the acknowledgement would have cost her something, and Sullivan did not want to extract a cost. He wanted to fix the fence. The fence needed fixing. The fixing did not require a conversation. He fixed it in the early morning before Dory was awake, or before she was outside, and the fixing was invisible. The posts reset, the wire tightened, the gap closed, so that when Dory walked her fence line in April, she found a fence that was sound, and she did not know why it was sound, and the not knowing was the point, because kindness that announces itself is performance, and kindness that does not announce itself is service, and Sullivan preferred service. She found out. She found out the second spring, when she woke early because a coyote had been at the chicken coop, and she went out at dawn with the shotgun, and she saw Sullivan on the fence line, his horse tied to a post, his tools laid out on the ground, his hands working the wire with the unhurried precision of a man who has done this work many times and who does not need to rush, because the work is not an emergency but a habit, and habits are performed at their own pace. She set the shotgun against the porch rail. She stood in her nightgown with a coat pulled over it, and her boots unlaced and her hair loose. The hair she braided every morning, because braiding was armor, and armor was necessary, because the world outside the braid was a world that judged a woman alone, and the judging was constant, the way weather is constant, present even when it is not noticed. She watched from the porch. She watched him reset a post and tighten the wire and move to the next post. And the watching was the assessment of a woman who has been doing everything alone for 2 years, and who is seeing, for the first time, evidence that alone is not the same as unwitnessed, that someone has been watching her fence the way she watches her cattle, with attention and concern, and the willingness to act when acting is needed. She did not say anything. She did not say anything, because saying something would have changed the arrangement, would have turned the invisible kindness into a visible obligation, and obligations require acknowledgement, and acknowledgement requires reciprocity, and reciprocity requires a relationship. And Dory Tull was not ready for a relationship, because relationships require trust, and trust requires vulnerability, and vulnerability was the thing Dory had sealed shut after Emmett died, the way a person seals a well after the water goes bad, completely, permanently, with the understanding that the sealing is protection, not punishment. The spring passed, summer came, the fence held, the wire stayed tight, and the posts stayed true, and the cattle stayed on their own side of the boundary, and the staying was the evidence that the work had been done, and done well, and the evidence was silent, the way all good work is silent. It does not announce itself, it simply endures. In September, she left a basket of peaches on his fence post, the north boundary post nearest his barn, the post he would see when he rode his morning fence line. The peaches were from the tree behind her house, the tree Emmett had planted in their first year, and the peaches were sweet and ripe, and she left them without a note, because a note would have been an acknowledgement, and an acknowledgement would have required a response, and a response would have started a conversation, and she was not ready for a conversation. She was ready only for peaches on a fence post, which is a smaller thing than a conversation, but a larger thing than silence. Sullivan ate the peaches. He ate them standing in his kitchen, one at a time, the juice running down his chin, and the eating was the receiving, and the receiving was the first time he understood that the fence mending was not invisible, that Dory knew, or suspected, and that the peaches were her answer, written in fruit instead of words. But she noticed the fence, and she noticed the man, and the noticing was the beginning. The doctor bill happened in November. Sullivan had been cutting timber in the south pasture, oak for fence posts, the same fence posts he would use in the spring to mend her fence, although he did not think of them that way, because the mending was not planned but inevitable, the way breathing is inevitable, an act so natural that planning it would be absurd, and the axe had glanced off a knot and taken a piece of his left hand, the meat below the thumb, and the piece was large enough to require a doctor, and the doctor was Dr. Phelps in town, and Dr. Phelps charged $3 for stitching and bandaging, which was a fair price for the work, but an inconvenient price for a man who had spent his autumn money on winter feed. Sullivan did not tell anyone about the hand. He bandaged it himself after Dr. Phelps stitched it, and he worked with one hand for 2 weeks while the other healed. And the working with one hand was difficult, but not impossible, and the difficulty was private, because Sullivan's life was private, and privacy was the structure of his existence, the walls and roof of the house he had built around himself. Dory found out about the hand from the postmistress. The postmistress knew everything, the way postmistresses in small towns know everything, not through malice, but through proximity, because a postmistress handles every letter, and every letter is a piece of information, and information accumulates the way snow accumulates, one flake at a time, until the accumulation is adrift. The postmistress mentioned that Sullivan had been to see Dr. Phelps, and that the bill was $3, and that $3 in November was a hard number for a man who had already bought his winter feed. Dory paid the bill. She walked to Dr. Phelps's office on a Tuesday morning, and she paid the $3, and she told Dr. Phelps not to tell Sullivan who had paid it, and Dr. Phelps agreed, because Dr. Phelps was a man who understood that the paying of another person's bill is sometimes a statement, and the statement does not require attribution to be understood. Sullivan found out. He found out the way people find out things in small towns, through the postmistress, who told the grocer, who told the feed store owner, who told Sullivan when Sullivan came in for salt in December. And the finding out was a revelation, not because the payment was unexpected, but because the payment was a reply. The fence mending was a letter written in wire and posts and early morning labor, and the bill paying was a response written in $3 and a Tuesday morning walk to the doctor's office, and the correspondence was complete. 2 letters, each written in the language of action, each saying the same thing: I see you, and the seeing is not passive. Winter passed. The winter was hard. The Flint Hills winters are hard in the way that all prairie winters are hard, with wind that does not stop, and cold that does not relent, and the particular isolation of a landscape that offers no shelter except the shelter you build. And the shelter Dory had built was her house, and her routine, and her stubbornness. And the stubbornness kept her warm, the way a stove keeps a room warm, not by eliminating the cold, but by maintaining a presence that the cold cannot extinguish. Sullivan checked on her cattle during a blizzard in January. He rode through the storm to the north boundary, and he found her 6 head huddled against the fence, and he drove them to his barn and kept them there for 3 days until the storm passed, and the keeping was not discussed, and was not acknowledged, the way the fence mending was not discussed, because the language of their relationship was the language of action, and action does not require translation. The 3rd spring, Sullivan mended the fence again. He mended it in the early morning, the way he always did. But this time, when he finished, he did not ride away. He rode to Dory's porch instead. He stopped his horse at the fence, her fence, the south fence, the one that faced the house. And he sat in the saddle and he waited, because waiting was his language, and Dory knew the language now. She came out. She came out with coffee, 2 cups, one for her and one for him, and the 2 cups were the first time she had said anything for anyone since Emmett died. And the setting was the opening, the unsealing of the well she had sealed 2 years earlier, and the water was not bad. The water was good. The water had been good the whole time. She had sealed it not because the water was bad, but because she was afraid of losing it again, and the fear of loss is the most common reason people refuse to receive. And receiving is the thing Dory was doing now, standing on her porch with 2 cups of coffee, offering one to a man who had mended her fence every spring, without being asked. Sullivan took the coffee. He dismounted and he stood at the fence between her yard and the road, the fence that was not broken and did not need mending. And he drank the coffee and she drank hers. And the drinking was the conversation, and the conversation was sufficient. "You paid my doctor bill," Sullivan said. "You mended my fence. The fence needed mending. The bill needed paying." The logic was circular, and the circularity was the point, because the point was not the fence or the bill. The point was the paying of attention, the slow accumulation of care, expressed through action over 3 years. The care that does not announce itself because announcing it would diminish it, the way explaining a joke diminishes the joke. The thing is either felt or it is not, and they had both felt it, and the feeling was mutual, and mutuality is the foundation, and the foundation was built. Sullivan looked at the fence he had just mended, the north boundary fence, visible from where they stood, the wire catching the early light like a thread of silver drawn across the grass. 3 springs of mending, 3 years of posts and wire and early morning rides. 3 years of a conversation conducted entirely in labor and peaches and $3 payments, and now, finally, in coffee. "I did not mend the fence because you could not," Sullivan said. "I mended the fence because I wanted to. There is a difference. One is charity, the other is care. Charity is what you give to a person you pity. Care is what you give to a person you respect. I have never pitied you. I have respected you since the first week after Emmett died, when you drove your cattle to winter pasture alone in a sleet storm and did not ask anyone for help. And the not asking was not stubbornness. The not asking was strength, and I wanted to match it." Dory held her coffee. She held it with both hands because the morning was cold, and because holding a warm thing with both hands is a form of comfort. and comfort was a thing she had not permitted herself in 2 years. "I paid the doctor bill because I wanted to," she said. "Not because you mended the fence. Because your hand was hurt, and the hurt needed paying for. And I had $3, and $3 spent on your hand was better than $3 spent on anything else I could think of." They stood at the fence with their coffee. The morning was cold. March in the Flint Hills is cold in the mornings. The wind coming across the grass like a hand pressing down, flat and steady and insistent. And the coffee was warm and the warmth was shared. And sharing warmth across a fence in the Flint Hills in March is as close to a declaration as two quiet people can come, and the declaration was enough. The fence between their properties remained. It remained because a fence is not a barrier. A fence is a line, and a line between two properties is also a line between two people. And the line does not separate. The line connects, the way the spine of a book connects two pages, and the pages are their lives, and the book is the thing they are writing together, one fence post at a time, one doctor bill at a time, one cup of coffee at a time, and the writing is slow and the writing is quiet, and the writing is permanent.